Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Beyond the Bottom Line, Mastering Tax Automation for ISPs with Sonar and Avalara, sponsored by Sonar and Avalara. Our presenters today are Jason Darland, Product Solutions Engineer with Avalara, Steve Lacoff, VP and General Manager of Communications with Avalara, and Georgette Lopez-Aguado, Senior Director of Client Relations at Sonar Software. I'm Michelle Coleman, Senior Director of Associate Engagement here at NTCA, and we believe that information about products and services should be made available to members so they can make informed decisions for themselves and their companies. As such, NTCA does not endorse, recommend, or make any representations with respect to the products or services being offered, sold, or described. If you have questions, please use the Q&A box to submit them. Questions will be addressed immediately following the presentation. And at this point, I will turn it over to Georgette. And it looks like you're muted, Georgette.
Good afternoon, and thank you to everyone who has taken the time to join us this afternoon, or for those of you who will be listening to the recording later on. The title of our presentation today is Beyond the Bottom Line, Mastering Tax Automation for ISPs with Sonar and Avalara. That said, we do have a small disclaimer we'd like to share with you guys. We're sharing information with you that should not be taken as tax advice. This is for informational purposes only. And we hope that you find the information that we're sharing with you helpful for you and your company. I will be introducing our presenters here momentarily. We're going to be starting with Jason Darland. And Jason, Steve, there we go. There's our disclaimer, and we've got a little safe harbor statement that we also want to share with you guys. Just knowing that the intention of the data is for your informational purposes only. Steve Lacoff is really going to be guiding the majority of our presentation today. We're thrilled that Steve has been available to join us. He's spent over 20 years in various roles and currently focuses on data, VoIP, and video streaming. So we really appreciate the partnership with Steve on this presentation. Later in the presentation, Jason Darland is going to hop on and show how this actually works in the background with Avalara, the connector between Avalara and Sonar. And Jason is a product solutions engineer with Avalara based out of Las Vegas. So welcome, Jason, as well. And as Michelle mentioned, my name is Georgette Lopez-Aguado. I've been with Sonar Software for around 7 years, and I run the client relations division. And I have the honor of being able to connect the dots between our customers and Avalara so that they know what the benefits are of the automations driven through this tax calculation capability. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the mic over to Steve, and we are going to learn some new trips and techniques about tax automation.
Great. Thanks, Georgette. Yeah, and again, we appreciate the time that everyone's taken to talk to us and learn about kind of the joint capabilities that Sonar and Avalara bring to bear. As Georgette mentioned, we've got a long-standing relationship with Sonar, helping to solve a wide range of problems from an invoicing and billing and tax compliance perspective. For a wide range of customers, but most specifically rural IPs. I think where we want to start is just talk about why it's important, to automate tax compliance, outline some of the complexities associated inherently within the tax and compliance landscape, and then talk a little bit more about the capabilities jointly that Sonar and Avalara bring to bear. First, as most of you may be familiar with, the tax landscape from an indirect tax perspective in the U.S. is exceedingly complex and daunting. And so here, as you see on the slide, just from a sales and use perspective alone, there are over 13,000 sales and use tax jurisdictions in the U.S. So if you're selling any services, across jurisdictions, or certainly on, a national or a regional basis, there's a massive amount of tax complexity that needs to be maintained. If you're selling communication services, it's even more challenging because, as most of you are likely aware, you're subject not only to the traditional sales and use indirect tax regime, but there's a whole family of communications tax services that can layer on top of or in lieu of sales and use tax that have their own rules and rates and compliance requirements that are unique to communication services. And so, we just wanted to go into a little bit of detail of what makes communication taxes, so challenging. What's unique about, this specific set of taxes? The first that we touched on is multiple taxes, will often apply to the same service. So depending on where you are selling and what you are selling, the specific services, they could be subject to sales and use. They could be subject to comms taxes only, or they could be subject to both types of taxes. But even if we just talk about communications taxes, right, you can take an example where, if you're selling wireless access services in California, right? I mean, we frequently see instances where you're going to see a single line item come through, and it's going to be subject to 10 distinct comms taxes on that basis. So again, there's a lot of complexity to wrap your arms around, and a lot of rates to maintain. The other thing is there's a wide variance in the tax application for different types of communication services. So the rules and the specific rates and how they are applied can vary if you're talking about voice, data, messaging. It's going to be very, very service independent. So that adds another layer of complexity. The other piece here is you've got to be able to track what type of seller, or I'm sorry, what type of buyer your customer is. So there are going to be different tax rates and different outcomes in many jurisdictions, whether you're selling to a consumer or whether you're selling to a business or an enterprise customer. There are also very complicated situs rules. And what we mean by situs rules is that literally the boundaries of the tax jurisdiction can be different from that in sales and use. So you could have a customer at a specific physical address. They may fall into one jurisdiction from a sales and use perspective, but with comms taxes, there are different special jurisdictions or library districts, and they could fall into a completely different jurisdictional basis, based on that type of tax. So it's not just rates and rules, but it's also being able to, take that first step correctly and map your customer to the appropriate jurisdictions from a tax perspective. And then the other piece is there's just really complicated math, right? With sales and use, generally that's going to be a percentage that's going to be applied, to the bill charges. With comms taxes, that can be the case, but frequently there's going to be a mix of percentage-based taxes, line-based taxes, per-minute-based taxes. Some jurisdictions will apply tiering or caps. So based on the amount that is sold to a customer on an invoice or for a specific service, you could have tiered rates. There's also tax on tax complexity. So in some instances, you can have communications taxes that don't just apply to what you're selling the service for, but they're also going to apply to any sales and use or other taxes that could be applied there. And then the last piece is bundling, right? Where increasingly, and I'm sure many of you are dealing with this. And I know we certainly see it a lot, Georgette, when we're working to set up customers, is you're selling a bundle that's basically a mix of multiple products, and being able to manage those allocations and those percentages can be really daunting. The last two here really relate to invoicing. With telecom services, there are specific tax presentation requirements. So there are literally specific literals for your invoices that are mandated, as well as recovery prohibitions and specific language that needs to be managed on the invoice. And then there's just messy nomenclature here, right? Where some jurisdictions will refer to a specific tax as a PUC charge, some as a PSC, and that's going to drive not only what has to be on the invoice, but it also just creates a lot of confusion in determining, what taxes may apply to a specific service. And so next we just want to show, look, here's a very high level view of the different types of taxes that can apply. They typically fall into two main categories. There's, like as we say on here, there's a little bit of blur, but generally they're taxes that apply to you, the seller, right? And they're passed on to customers as surcharges. And these things relate to, a lot of these are regulatory charges like USF, lifeline charges, TRS charges, specific agency fees. Frequently, these are applied on a per line basis. And then there are taxes that apply to the buyer. Now, it's the seller's responsibility to collect and remit that tax, but these are things like sales tax. In California, you've got UT. In Florida, there's CST taxes. There's going to be specific excise taxes, as well as E911 charges. And so, as you can see here, right, there's a whole suite of tax regimes under this kind of broad layer of communications taxes. And calculating the tax correctly is really just kind of the start of the complexity, right? The problem is, as we said, there's a lot of different rates, there's a lot of different rules. Frequently, there's really no way to maintain or apply these taxes accurately. But the problem is once you are subject to a tax, that complexity kind of cascades through the compliance lifecycle. And, the main thing that it impacts is returns, right? If you're collecting tax, you've got to remit that tax. You've got to make sure that it's calculated accurately on the return. You've got to file the return on time, and you've got to remit payment, right? And so there's a lot of opportunities for failure here. And so basically what you see here is every tax that we've kind of outlined that needs to be calculated and collected, there's going to be a form associated with that tax. And those forms are different based on jurisdiction. The timing of those forms, whether they're monthly, quarterly, or annual, can vary. And then also there are specific remittance requirements for those compliance forms. And so, we're going to actually go into a demo shortly to kind of show you the capabilities and how it works within Sonar and then within our platform. But here we're just, showing a high-level overview of kind of how our integration works, right? Sonar provides a ton of value across a lot of operational capabilities for ISPs. Where we typically hook in is in the billing and invoice module, right? So where you're selling something. And so, the way this works is out of that billing module, there are going to be invoices and line items on those, specifically on those invoices. If you follow that orange line, you're going to, the blue line, you're going to have those transactions coming out of Sonar, right? We have a pre-integration with that platform. So our tax engine works out of the box with Sonar, where those transactions are sent natively over to our AvaTax for Communications tax engine. We calculate the tax, and then we send a response back on a per line item, per tax type basis. So if you've got one line item that's subject to two taxes, you're going to get two responses, and then so forth with any other line items. Now the key here is that once we calculate those taxes and those transactions, we store them natively in the cloud, and then we have a second optional solution, which is our returns for communications capability, and that allows us to take those tax engines and we're going to automatically pull those from our system. We're going to automatically fill out the appropriate returns. We're going to file those automatically, and then we're also going to remit payment. As part of that service, we also handle, what we refer to as out of cycle. So in cycle is every month, every quarter, every year, you're filing returns. But there are going to be ad hoc things that you may need to do, like filing or registering with the various tax jurisdictions for sales and use and comms taxes, and we handle that as part of our service. And so the point here is that, collectively between Sonar and between our Avalara for Communications solution, you've really got an end-to-end capability that handles not only invoicing, but all of those kind of core compliance needs, and handles that complexity natively. So we're managing all the rates and rules in the cloud. Those rates and rules change. We've got a capability where we automatically update those, so that for any transaction, you are calculating the correct tax. And then we also have an exemptions capability. So if you've got a reseller channel, or if you're selling to tax exempt organizations, in the early part of 2025, we're going to be able to offer this capability where you can not only store exemption certificates from your customers who may not be subject to tax, but that is also going to be tied into our tax engine. And so you don't have to determine whether a transaction is for a tax exempt customer. We're going to execute that intelligence and logic natively in the cloud, right? And so that's just a high level overview of what we're going to demo and of our joint capabilities that we offer through our partnership with Sonar. And then just to give you some sense of like, okay, what's the benefit of the automation? And we can share this separately and post this at the end of the webinar. But we partner with Gartner, where we've tried to look at various scenarios and really calculate that ROI. I'm not going to go through this in detail, but as you can see, there's some really significant efficiencies that we can drive across the tax and compliance workflow. And so, there's going to be direct savings as well as risk mitigation. And what we've seen is that customers get a payback typically in less than 6 months, and an ROI, that's north of 100%. So, we think there's real value in our capabilities. And we just wanted to talk, before we get into the demo, just a little bit of what are the risks of not automating and manual tax compliance. And what we're going to go through here is a study that we conducted in partnership with a market research company, Aberdeen. These are not our customers. These are communication service providers that cut across different segments. And we've tried to capture some information that we found is pretty interesting. And I know, Georgette, in some of the conversations that we've had, these are frequently come up in conversations that we've got with mutual customers and prospects. And so the first thing lines up with, what are the top challenges with communications tax management processes, right? What are the things that customers are trying to solve? And as you can see, it's really distributed here, right? I mean, there's difficulty with determining which services are subject to tax and the specific tax. There's a lot of inefficiency around tax calculation and reporting processes, particularly if customers are attempting to do this manually. One thing we chronically hear is, look, this is a really complex space, and it's just hard for us to maintain this expertise internally, right? And there's a lot of risk with trying to manage it internally. The next piece is the inability to stay up to date on regulatory changes. As we touched on, rates and rules are changing on a monthly basis. Forms are changing. Tax reporting requirements are changing. And being able to keep track of that, kind of in-house and manually and going to jurisdictional websites frequently doesn't work. And then another key piece is difficulty managing exemption certificates. So, typically what we see is, this is really kind of a key vector for auditors or jurisdictions to come in on is, they'll look at what service providers are outlining as exempt revenue, and they'll want documentation to support that. That's typically where the audit cycle starts. Georgette, anything you'd add in terms of conversations with customers or some of these challenges?
Steve, you've really hit the nail on the head. It's the automation. All of these pieces happen automatically in the background, and you can be guaranteed that the information is passing seamlessly between Sonar and Avalara back to your instance of Sonar, and that your customers are readily able to see the information in a clear and concise manner. So it's really, we're trying to eliminate those barriers for our customers to be able to add additional service options to their customers.
Right. Yeah, and then just, a couple of other items that we want to go through before we get into demo is, what do customers categorize as, fears related to taxes? And maybe some of these resonate with you. The one that was at the top of the list is that companies are looking to innovate before they're prepared to handle the tax issues. So some of you may had a scenario where a product person came to you and said, hey, great news, we're launching this service. It's going to generate all this additional bookings and income. But typically what we find is the tax department are the last people to hear about this. And so there's a rush to figure out, how are we going to handle this from a tax and compliance perspective, which is crucial. And then the other is, integrating to existing or future systems, right? So, tax, ERP, shopping carts, frequently what we see is customers may have multiple systems and they're trying to consolidate those into one unified platform like Sonar. And as we touched on at the beginning, integration with platforms is a big part of what we do. Our capabilities with respect to Sonar are, rock solid, they're hardened, they're proven with customers. That integration provides a lot of value to customers in terms of it just working out of the box and not really needing or requiring a lot of technology integration. And then the last points here are just kind of, these won't surprise anyone, right? I mean, everyone's worried about finding penalties and audits, and it's very few that have no concerns related to taxes, right? It's 11%. And then, the last part here is what are the reasons for failing an audit, right? And there are two that kind of jump out here. The first is just miscalculation of tax rates, right? Really challenging to do this complexity, to handle this complexity manually. It's not surprising that is, something that's frequently listed. And then the last piece is what we touched on, with respect to improper documentation. And what that really comes down to is, maintaining registrations, filing returns, but then also exemption management, and making sure you've got those exemption certificates on file. So there are a lot of ways that can trigger failures during an audit, those two stood out. And then the last piece that we wanted to talk about is just some unique challenges for rural ISPs, right? So, FCC and regulatory compliance is a big requirement. Broadband providers typically have to file a 477 and potentially a 499 if they're selling voice services, and maintain that compliance with the FCC, as well as, similar potential requirements with the state. The second is proliferation of new services, right? Frequently we see, customers that may be broadband only providers. There's a compelling need to offer additional services like voice and video and maybe managed services to enterprise customers. And so when you do that, it's really important to watch out for additional responsibilities from a tax and billing perspective. The third is just the prevalence of bundling and the inherent complexity with that. I would say that's more the standard versus the rule, where customers are increasingly looking to bundle multiple services into a single price point, while at the same time still maintaining, a la carte offerings. And so, that creates a lot of complexity, not only from an invoicing perspective, but particularly from a tax perspective. There are implications of government-sponsored subsidies. Customers who may qualify for direct credits may also automatically qualify for exemption from certain taxes, right? Almost like a manufacturer's rebate. And those are kind of things that are unique where there are subsidies from a broadband access perspective. And then the last is, I think we all face this, but I think it's, we certainly hear this as a pain point with a lot of customers, is just ongoing resource challenges, right? As we talked about, it takes a lot of expertise within the tax department, just to understand the taxes, right? Let alone, trying to maintain these separately. And so, constantly trying to figure out what are ways that we can drive efficiencies and automate, right? And so that's, just a bit of background into the complexity, of comms taxes. What are some of the, risks and fears in terms of customers that either are or attempting to do this manually or moving into automation. And I think with that, we can hand this over to a live demo. So Georgette, I'm going to hand this over to you, and we're going to start with Sonar's platform, and then we can transition to Jason, and he can show a little bit from an Avalara perspective.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Steve. There's two different ways that our customers can come into lighting up the Avalara integration. One is a net new customer that's coming in, and through the process of the implementation, design configuration process that our team goes through, we would have a sandbox environment. Sonar's in test mode. We connect Sonar to your Avalara sandbox instance, and that looks like it's very, very simple. We go to settings and billing, and we're under that tax provider configuration because, as Steve mentioned earlier, this really is tied to our billing module. So we would set up the credentials, including, the states that we want to include in our tax calculation, the username, password, client ID, and if there's a relevant client profile ID, would include that as well. And then the service type. So you answer these questions, and then we take that configuration down to the service plan level. So for example, we'd go to services, and if we were going to create a voice service, we would, because we have Avalara already turned up, we would be able to map the TS pairings for those individual tax pairings that we need to assign to whatever service it is that you are adding into your book, into your offerings for your customers. You'll complete the different pieces of information, and then that service plan itself has the automation that's going to drive out during a billing period to Avalara in the model that Steve shared a few moments ago. And it will return back to Sonar exactly the line items that would tie to those services. So a net new customer is going to have the opportunity to actually run a trial billing run that would let them see the individual taxes on the invoices for the customer and make sure that apples to apples, everything is running as we're expecting. Now, a customer who doesn't currently have Avalara in place, we would stand up a sandbox and do a very similar method. We would take their book of business. We would make sure that all the TS pairings are matched up appropriately. We're going to run a trial billing or two in that sandbox environment, and then we're going to take those settings and mirror them over into their production instance. So it's a seamless transition from using our geographic and manual taxation methods that have to be updated and looked at on a monthly or quarterly basis for the jurisdictions that you're offering services to, or know that Avalara is going to make those adjustments for you on the back end and be able to tie all the pieces together. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and actually turn the screen over to Jason, because that's where the automation happens. The magic happens on the back end through the connector with Sonar, and we can all work together to delight our customers.
Thanks, Georgette. Perfect. So as those transactions are processing through Sonar, hitting our AvaTax for Communications tax engine, we are storing that data for reporting and compliance filing purposes. And so what I'm going to walk through really quickly is a high-level overview of our reporting portal and our compliance filing portal, so that you can kind of see that process to the end. Here in our reporting portal, you're going to be able to select kind of standard out-of-the-box reports that we have for you. We also have the capability for you to create your own custom reports, and I'll show some samples of these reports here in a second. But you can come in here and select our standard reports. We have our compliance report, our transaction service report, our transaction detail report. And I do have a couple custom reports in here that you can identify by the little trash can, allows you to delete any custom reports that you may have created that you no longer want. So you're simply selecting the report that you want to run. You can then select the time period for the data that you want to view, whether it be for a single month or a specific date range. You have options to include things like no tax transactions. Those would be products and services that aren't subject to tax. We still track that information. You can still view that in our reports. You can also select to view committed transactions, uncommitted transactions, or a combination of both committed and uncommitted. What that is from a high level, committed transactions would be your final sales, those things that are actually invoiced out to the customer. Uncommitted is going to be more of your estimates and quotes, things of that nature. Once you have all of that information selected, you can preview those reports here in our portal themselves, or you can download those reports. It would be available to you in a CSV type file for you to actually be able to download. I mentioned that you can create custom reports. This is done by clicking on this columns tab. And this is going to bring up two different lists of columns here. So the list on the right is going to be all of the columns that are currently in that report that you've selected. The list on the left is going to be a list of all of the potential columns that can be added to that report. So this allows you to take any information on that left side, add it to the report where you want to. You can take items that are already in that report, move them around so that you are customizing that report to the way you want to see the information. You can also take columns that are in the report and remove them from the report. Once you have that configured to the way you want to see it, you can simply apply that report there and save it as a template. And once you do save it as a template, then you would have that in your dropdown. So you don't have to come in and create that custom report every time. Let me jump over and show you a few sample reports that come out of this. So I have a few of them here, just kind of our standard reports. The first one being our compliance report, specifically the compliance detail report. This is going to be a summarization of your tax liability, broken out by jurisdiction, by the individual tax type, by your tax level. It's going to show you what the tax rate is, right? What your gross sales are, any exemptions or adjustments that you're processing through, and the net taxable measure. It also tracks things like minutes, lines, if that's applicable for the services that were processed. The transaction detail report is going to be a more granular report. Instead of summarizing your tax liability by jurisdiction, this is breaking out all of your individual transactions. So you can see that input information and the taxes that are returned for every single transaction that gets sent to our tax engine. And so you're going to be able to see things like when was the transaction sent to our tax engine? What was the invoice date from that specific transaction? When was it committed? Right? Things of that nature. It's going to have the individual breakdown of those taxes, has your jurisdiction, the tax types, your tax amounts, exemptions, adjustments, all of that similar information as well, just broken out at the transaction level. And then it also shows that input information, right? The transaction service type, which from an Avalara perspective is the type of product or service that you're selling. What product or service was sent to our tax engine? What was the charge amount? What was the customer type, the sale type? All of those things can have an effect on your tax rate or tax application. So a very granular, detailed report there for you. Then the last one, the transaction service report, is more for regulatory filings, things of that nature, where you're needing to report your revenue broken out by kind of the product or service being sold in specific jurisdictions. So it's exactly what we're doing here. You have your input charge, shows again your transaction service type, which is the product being sold. broken out by jurisdictions. This report specifically at the state level, we have the option in that reporting portal. You can break it out at a local level, more granular level if needed as well. So that's a very high level overview of our reports portal. I'm going to jump over to our compliance portal now as well. And so as those transactions are processed, as the month comes to an end, we are going to be able to take that data, populate returns, file and remit on your behalf. And this is our portal for that process. And the first tab that I am on here is view and add returns. And this is really for you to set up kind of your filing calendar. What returns are we going to be filing and remitting on your behalf? So it allows you to add any tax returns in this area, right? Selecting the tax return, the tax form. Is it going to, you're setting up your frequency, monthly, quarterly, annual, the method, is it electronic? Is it a paper return? Things of that nature. And your effective date. When do you want us to start filing and remitting that return on your behalf? Once that is set up, then we go through the kind of monthly process of filling out those returns for you, and then filing and remitting and approving those returns on a monthly basis for you as well. And so essentially at the end of the month, the data from the tax engine is going to be transferred into our compliance portal. We're going to populate those returns for you. We're going to provide you this information at the beginning of the month so you can look through and verify these returns the 1st through the 6th of the month. What this is going to show you is kind of each jurisdiction, and it's going to show you the individual returns in each jurisdiction that are going to be filed, what your total sales were, taxable sales, the tax that was calculated, and the amount due. It's also going to show you what's accruing for maybe quarterly or annual filings. It will show this information. Same breakout here as taxable sales, things of that nature. You also have the option here. You can drill down into individual returns to see more details and adjustments, things like rounding or discounts that are applied, things of that nature. We also have this regions needing attention tab. So if there are transactions that were processed through our tax engine in, let's say, new jurisdictions that you aren't registered in yet, it will flag those for you so that you can decide to add that return and have us start filing and remitting those in those jurisdictions for you. Once they are filed and returned throughout the month, you will have a page where you can come in and view those returns that have been filed, see those confirmations of what's been filed on your behalf. And that's really what's going to be shown on this page here. Again, you can drill down into more granular detailed levels to show exactly the breakout there, any details as far as roundings, discounts, things of that nature that were applied to that specific return. And then finally, I will touch on the reports from the compliance side of things. And so we do have a reports page where you can come in here, you can have your favorite reports set up, but you can simply come into our tax return and reports section. We have drop down with the reports here, selecting specific period, and just creating that report right from our portal. And jump into a sample of the reports from our returns portal here. The first one we have is our variance return report. And this is going to show what your tax liability is from the previous period compared to the current period. And it'll show you any sort of difference in those amounts, both in a dollar and percentage basis. And as you can see, kind of scrolling down here, it will identify that dollar percentage basis for each individual return that we are filing for you. And then at the bottom for a total of all of your tax liability. We provide a held report, so just showing what's being held over for any type of quarterly or annual filings, what those returns are, the amounts that are being held over. And then our not authorized report is just, again, identifying those jurisdictions where either you may have some tax data coming through and you haven't set up those returns yet. Maybe you haven't authorized us to file and remit there, whether you are handling that return yourself, or maybe it's a new customer in a new jurisdiction and you have an internal threshold you want to meet before you start registering and filing in that jurisdiction. You can identify that on this not authorized report. And then the final one is going to be our liability return detail. This is going to show your individual returns, the frequency, the jurisdiction, and it's going to break out your sales tax liability, your sales tax totaled, so your sales numbers, both for sales tax, for use tax, and for telecommunications tax. And so it will also then show a total of those liabilities here, the amount due, the amount that's going to be remitted. It takes into account any sort of discounts, other adjustments, things of that nature. So that's really a high level overview of our reporting portal and our compliance reports. I think now I will be tossing it back to Steve for a few closing statements.
Yeah, that's great, Jason. And, hopefully the thing that we're trying to convey here is that, and that came across, was that between, Sonar and Avalara, we're really able to provide, ISPs an end-to-end solution. And so through one out-of-the-box integration that we have with our tax engine into Sonar's invoicing and billing capabilities, we can handle all of the indirect tax and compliance needs that you may have across sales and use, as well as communications taxes. So we can calculate the tax, we can take those transactions and file accurate returns and remit accurate payments, and then we can also handle any filing or registration needs that you may have. And so, the key benefits are, this is not an integration, IT intensive effort, right? Our platforms tie together natively. There's just some upfront configuration that needs to happen in terms of mapping your SKUs to a specific tax code. And then from there, it works automatically, transaction by transaction and month over month. And the other key benefits you get from this are, by having one provider from a tax perspective, you're able to gain real end-to-end visibility and accuracy across your compliance lifecycle, right? So it's not that, hey, the tax engine calculated it this way, and then I've got to map this over and have kind of this cross mapping in order to be able to file the returns, right? It's one set of data, it's one set of technology, and it just works natively out of the box. And so, that eliminates a lot of finger pointing, right, at month end, or if there's issues with, inaccuracies, you're not in a situation where you're having to figure out, was it the engine, or is this an error on my return, or is it an error in the billing system? Right. There's really kind of one throat to choke here from a tax perspective. And because you're able to automate this kind of end to end, there's a lot of efficiency that's brought to bear in terms of, really streamlining the time and resources needed, to invoice your customers and collect and file those taxes accurately. And so, to close this out, just a quick summary, right? I mean, we feel like we've got the ideal solution here for rural ISPs. It's easy to integrate. We can provide a complete set of capabilities, or we can provide just standalone tax engine capabilities, right? It's whatever suits the needs that our customers may have. So there's a lot of flexibility in terms of what we offer. We're going to be automating this and driving efficiency out of the box. We're going to be reducing the risk of penalties and interest and audits, right? Because we're maintaining all the rates and rules. You've got basically a guarantee that these are taxed accurately. And then, we've got a really strong track record. We've worked with Sonar for years. We've got a long list of happy customers. For us, that's really kind of the ultimate barometer on whether we're doing our jobs. Are we keeping our customers happy and maintaining those relationships? And over time we have. And so I think that's it in terms of what we were going to present. I think at this point, we can open it up to any questions that there may be from anyone on the call.
As a quick reminder, you can drop any questions that you might have in the Q&A window in the webinar. And Steve, I absolutely want to echo what you were saying. Our longstanding partnership is a mutually beneficial arrangement, not just for us as partners, but as our customers. This three-way win that we can put on the table for the customers. And I spent many years in implementation. It's been easy to work with your team. There's a clear vision for what's going to happen. And it's just a great way for us to be able to connect the dots for our customers.
Yeah. Likewise.
Thank you so much for the presentation. Is it okay if we post this presentation on our website?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
we can do that. We'll get you a clean version to post today, Michelle.
Great. So we'll go ahead and get this posted. So for those who may have missed it, if you go to the NTCA website, ntca.org, and just click on events and then webinars and go to the archive webinars, and you'll see the recording there.
Great. Well, thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so
Thank
much,
you,
Michelle.
Team Avalara and Team Sonar Software. Thank you so much for a very informative webinar. Appreciate it.
Good deal.
For the rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.